Hello there, and welcome back to the museum basement bar. I've got an item for you today, of course, one that I don't know much about, but it was given to me. My brother gave it to me, and he would have got it from my father after my father passed away. So it is a Morse code key, and it is heavy. Now this is a thing of beauty. It's hard to get a good angle here. You wouldn't believe how much this weighs. I have no idea why. It's called a Vibra Vox from New York, the Vibra Vox company, New York. There we go. You can see the end. It's got the key itself that you tapped. My father was a ham radio operator, so there's another one I think my brother still has, just a very small, simple one with a black key that he used all the time. This was special. I have friends who are ham radio operators, and they could probably tell you a lot more about this one, but it's a fine piece of machinery. I remember seeing it as a kid and being amazed, wow, that looks neat. But don't specifically recall him using that. Basically, my father always had a radio room. Whatever house we lived in, starting in Valleyfield when I was just a little child, actually in Sorel before that, I have a very interesting picture from there. He had a radio room, and that was his ham radio stuff. He was a VE2YP were his call letters from Quebec. He moved to Ontario and he got VE3XYP. A lot of his equipment came off the Corvettes after the war. He was in the shipbuilding industry in Sorel. He was manager of the plant for quite a while. Basically, this is not going to be about the Morse code key. It's going to be about my dad. Gosh, I just like the looks of this here, but the damn thing's getting heavier and heavier. He was a mystery to, I think, all his children. Part of that was to do with just his nature. He was a quiet, a private man, although he liked to have a drink, and he did play the banjo when he was young, and up until, gosh, a few years, well, I'll say several years before he died, he'd play the banjo. It was something, he was very shy, and it was something we just enjoyed so much. Dad, get out the banjo, and he'd play, please, Mr. Banjo, play a song for me, or something like that. And so those were happy memories. But a lot of my childhood, I can remember looking in the room at night, and you'd see the back of his head, and there he is talking to people in the dark. In the distance, people he would meet. I was going to say online, but through the networks they established. And I guess the part that we're still intrigued by is during the war, his health was not good. I think he had pneumonia when he was young, and he wanted to join the Navy, and he couldn't get into the Navy. But I believe they had another job for him, and maybe because he was a Morse code operator, and I see that at one point he studied German. There was a very big spy network, worldwide, but certainly it existed in Canada. There was a lot of resistance to supporting merry old England during the war. He was in the province of Quebec, and all my mother knew was that he would have to go away for a few days, and if she needed to reach him, there was a number she could call in Montreal, and that person could get a message to my father if there was an emergency. So that tells us he was doing something. I don't think he was a spy running around, but I'm sure he was familiar with Camp X, not far from here. And of course he took the Secrecy Act and never told us about it, never really wanted to talk about it. We all wanted to know, and he died with those secrets, exactly what it was he did. But I'm pretty sure it was involved with why were the ships being sunk as soon as they headed out into the Atlantic, who was leaking the information, and I suppose if we dug deep enough, we could maybe find some of this information now that it's probably declassified. So that's a part that was always intriguing. I mean, he was a good-looking man. Um, I guess I know I had my struggles. I think I always wanted more from him, or felt that way as a child, and ended up going through group therapy myself, and sort of wishing I had had, I don't know, I guess a better connection with my dad when I was younger. I felt I displeased him. I was a bit of a wimpy kid, a fussy eater, and I think I was ashamed of all that later on. Now, the good news is, you know, he lived long enough to see me married and have children, and we had a very good relationship at the end. So I'm relieved and satisfied about that. Glad that he could see me finally grown up. I mean, I guess it's a two-way street. He did not appreciate at all my hair down to here, and sort of my hippy-dippy ways, and he had to have been knowing that I was smoking hashish in the basement of the house where we lived in Lachine. I had it rigged up, so I always unscrewed the basement light. It would be dangerous to come down there at nighttime. And but there were things I had it set up like basically a hippie pad. I had big posters of Edward G. Robinson, Raquel Welch, W.C. Fields on the wall. And he came home with a poster one day, and I think it said, "God bless this pad." And it was just a gift for me. He also bought me drums when I was in high school. I have no musical talent, as I've mentioned before. But he knew I needed something, and for a high school teenager, just sorting out who you are and where you're at, having a set of drums just to beat the hell out of was not a bad thing. And he did it the right way. He started me off with a bass and a snare, and a good Zildjian cymbal, and I guess I saved money in my summer jobs and bought the rest, a nice hi-hat and a tom and a bass tom and whatever. I still have those in the garage, I'm afraid. I should have found a better use for them many years ago when somebody might have actually wanted to use them, but there they are. So yeah, he was a kind of a neat fellow. The ladies admired him. The ladies, when they had their parties, I think they always found Leslie, that was his name, you know, a bit of a David Niven type looking character. Had a charm of his own, and a good sense of humor, especially with a few drinks into him when he was with his friends. That's something we didn't see. We just knew him. You didn't want to make him unhappy. He just knew his way of teaching us, training us, was to show disapproval, and not through anger, but through disappointment. And I don't know if I've picked up. I know I have picked up some of his bad habits. I think my children would remind me of that. But he was a pretty special man, and you know, like any man who loses his father, you always wish they were still around, that you could have further conversations with, find out a little more about. I think one of the reasons I went into podcasting was to leave my story behind, because there's so much about my father's story that I wish I knew. That time during the war, you know, they went through the 30s. He started off, I think he was a chauffeur for the, was it the Simard family, I think, who pretty well owned part of Quebec anyway in the shipbuilding industry, and worked his way up to be manager of the plant in Sorel, where they were building the corvettes for the war. There was one time he talked about having to go and visit Hal Banks, who was basically a union leader, but tied sort of deeply in with the underworld. And talked about, I remember him telling us about, you know, the number of guards you had to sort of go by to get into the room with him, and it would have been a bit intimidating. I don't know what the reason for that visit was. During while he was manager in Valleyfield, that's why I grew up in Valleyfield, he was managing the St. Lawrence Seaway project. So that's a big part of who my father was. He was involved. It was in charge of the dredging of, it was called Camp 3, where they established a base, but in the lake near Valleyfield. Gosh, I should have these facts. Was it? I couldn't even tell you the exact whereabouts, but it was part that was essential for the completion of the St. Lawrence Seaway, which was opened, a joint American-Canadian project in 1958. And so he had this job. He had this wonderful, huge house in Valleyfield. We were a somebody, or the Bull family was a somebody in Valleyfield at that time. But there was, I guess the unions were involved. He was management, and he talks about being given a blackjack, which my brother and I got hold of. Boy, I guess it's a lead coil. You just tap that on a wall, and it makes a dent. It makes a hole. It was a dangerous thing. He had a garret, I guess, from wartime, and I remember he cut that up into little strips, little pieces, announcing this is a wicked thing. And he loved animals, was passionate about animals. I know when he saw a bucking bronco from probably the Calgary Stampede, he just got up and turned off the TV, and all he said was, bastards, bastards, you know. That horse is in pain. So he was compassionate that way. He loved his radio and his gadgets and his cars. He had GM overalls, and he and my brother would fix up the car. He got, I guess, when he was probably about 50. You know, when a man often goes back and reclaims some of the youth, he had bought a 63 Chev Bel Air, and then installed a Hurst floor shift and Sun tachometers and Stuart Warner gauges and Dynatone exhaust, and he had a hot car. And then when the 66 Caprice came out, it was a sleeper. It was just a dark royal blue beefed up engine, and he would go up, he'd say, I gotta go for a carbon run, which meant, you know, speed the car along the Highway 40, I guess, and run it pretty fast. So he was a pretty, overall, a pretty fascinating man, a pretty interesting man, and I miss him, I love him, and I'm sorry he's gone. There's a whole lot more, and maybe as I pick up other objects in the bar, there'll be other stories, but for now, I thought the Morse code was a pretty good pretty good way of starting this off. Pardon my, I'm slurring my words today. I'm a little tired. So there you go. We'll catch you again at another time. Scarborough Dude, signing off.